eventually after the first book has launched, you'll be wanting to think about starting something new. So I wanted to address what that process looks like. When should you start working on your next book? Generally, you want to start within a day and a month of launching your book. I think the earlier you are in the learning curve, the more time is going to be eaten up by education. So launching your first book, doing a lot of marketing, doing a lot of promotion, even if that stuff isn't successful, even if it's not actually moving copies, you are still learning. So don't make the mistake of assuming that if the first book doesn't take off, it's a failure, because that's the normal process for all writers. So the first book, you're learning everything at once. You're learning the marketing, the design, the publishing, building your website. There's a huge, steep education curve. And what a lot of authors experience is they get to this point where they're like, okay, my book failed. I tried to be a writer, nothing is working. I tried everything, I give up. That's normal. That's where most people get to, and that's actually where you want to be early on. The faster you can get to that point, the faster you'll be able to succeed, because that's the point where you either give up and decide you're not going to be a writer, or you're just too frustrated, or it's the pivot. It's the moment when you say, okay, I went into this with all of my ideas and expectations, and now I realize I was totally wrong. What I thought was true isn't true. Now I'm ready to actually learn what I didn't know. A lot of authors are, when you start writing or publishing a book, a lot of authors come into it with strong opinions. So you should come into it thinking, I'm going to do it this way. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to do all these cool things. And chances are none of it's going to work. If it's your first book, like I said, first book, first online business, chances are your big ideas are not going to sell books. But you need to fail to realize that and understand that. So when I see posts on Facebook like, I did everything, nothing worked for me, the game is rigged, I'm just going to give up and go back to my real job. There's this point of frustration a lot of authors reach, which is a normal part of the process. So you have to understand that if you reach that point, that's actually good. You've come far and you've hit the point where you've realized your expectations were inflated. Now you can have an authentic, realistic relationship with the publishing industry and start learning the things you need to know to get better. That's where your actual education begins. Off topic, but if you know the hero's journey or the tarot cards that starts off with the Fool card, I have a post about being a fool, starting as a fool and becoming a magician. You have to start as a fool, and you don't know what you don't know. And in the process of failure and frustration, you discover what you don't know. That's part of the learning process. And then if you decide you want to learn the things that you don't know, you can learn it. It's hard. In the beginning, your first book, steep learning curve. You're going to learn a lot of things. So like I said, even if the first book is a failure, which it almost always is for most authors, it's not a failure. You've learned a whole bunch of things. Your second or third book, you're going to be learning more things higher up the ladder, things that you didn't know existed. And eventually, when you've learned all the things are going to start getting really easy for you. So you don't want to give up too early. You do want to keep launching new books, because if you just keep repeating the same things you've been doing for the first book, you're never going to get up to those higher stages. So at some point, usually about after a month, after you've launched your first book, about a month later, you still want to do, like, a lot of the stuff I do is long term. So you still want to make the content, you still want to be building relationships, but you don't want to be just continually promoting and marketing the first book, especially if you're not getting a good return on investment. So like if I can't make advertising and promotion work, if I'm spending money and nothing's working, almost always it's because your cover is wrong or your basic description doesn't convert well enough. And you can test and tweak that. So in the beginning, the process might be very slow because you're going to be doing lots of experiments. So you're going to be figuring out why the first book failed, why nobody's buying it. You have to do experiments, you have to get feedback, you have to be willing to be flexible, to hear other people's advice and to ask for advice and be like, hey, nobody's buying my book. What did I do wrong? People will tell you advice, and a lot of new authors will reject it. They'll be like, no, I'm not going to listen to that because I have my own ideas about what will make a successful project. You have to fail long enough to be willing to give up the things that you're holding on to, the things that you're clinging to, and be willing to embrace other people's advice and think, oh, maybe they know what they're talking about. I'm going to try that out and see if it works. That's a point. It's like you have to give up your ego, and you reach that point through failure. So you shouldn't be trying to avoid failure or frustration. You should really be seeking it, because if you seek failure and recognize that it's part of the process, you won't feel frustrated or demoralized. You'll feel like, okay, great, I'm at this stage. This is normal. Now I'm going to go on to the next stage, which is the next book. And my point is basically, even if the first book is a failure, or especially if the first book is a failure, don't worry about it. Start thinking about the next book. Maybe you didn't write to market. You didn't write a book that readers want to read. You have these skills now. You've figured out how to write and market and publish a book. Now for your next book, think about writing something a little more that's gonna, I don't like to say marketable or commercial even, but you want to write something that's going to provide value to more people, that more people are going to like. So you have to discover who are the more people that you actually want to reach, and what kinds of books do they actually like. You have to do research and learn that, and then decide what kind of book you can write with your skills, your writing style, and your interests. I'm not saying you should just write some genre that you have no interest in. It should be the genre that you enjoy reading also, but see how you can take that genre and make it your own, and use your interests and hobbies and background and experience to provide a new kind of reading experience in that genre that still over delivers on genre and tropes and expectations, and makes, satisfies readers. They have to like it or the book won't be successful. So some authors who have been doing this for a long time, they generally start the day after. So they do their editing. Full-time authors, they work a lot harder than I am accustomed to at this point. But they do editing to meet a deadline. They launch the book. They do their promotions, and the next day even, they don't take a day off. They don't take it easy and celebrate their success. They get out the next book and they start outlining. They start mapping it out. Even if it's only an hour or two of work a day, you can still kind of take it easy. But the point is to get into a habit where you have a string of projects lined up, and you always know. I'm going to stop myself because you don't always know what's going to come, because through the process of writing books, you're going to discover what is successful. You're going to discover what readers like. So you don't necessarily want to have a plan and say, I'm going to finish this 7-book series and I'm going to get to the end before I start marketing book 1, because that may totally fail. If nobody likes book 1, if nobody finishes book 1, you've wasted a lot of time on this huge 7-book series. So I don't necessarily think you should just map out a huge series. Personally, I've been trying to finish the first book in 10 potential series to find out which books get the most traction. But actually, I wouldn't even have had to do that, because I can do keyword research, and I already know that vampires sell 10 times better than werewolves, which sell 10 times better than fallen angels, which sell 10 times better than mermaids. And I started with a mermaid book. So you don't have to test this out to see what people like. You can go on Amazon and look at the top 100 and know exactly what's selling. And that's the easy way to find out how you can tie in with what's popular. And there's this thing about avoiding trends. A lot of authors say don't chase the trends because they change too quickly. Actually, trends tend to last 2 or 3 years. So like 5 years ago was dystopia, but that actually is coming back now. Right now in traditional publishing, it's fantasy, but in self-publishing, we fulfill a gap that traditional publishers won't touch. So like vampires and fallen angels are still crazy popular, and traditional publishers aren't publishing books like that anymore, which means for self-published authors who do it well, that's a huge market that we can satisfy that traditional publishers aren't even looking at. It's a huge market. So you have to be flexible and be willing to pivot, and explore through failure which projects are going to succeed. You have to be willing to give up your, I don't want to say give up your ideology or give up like your passionate beliefs, but often the beliefs about publishing or writing are what get authors in trouble. So the more rigid beliefs you have about the art of writing or the craft of writing or whatever, if you aren't willing to be flexible and to test things out and to potentially write something that more people are going to enjoy, that might be a stumbling block for you. So you need to at least be self-aware enough to realize if your book isn't selling, you may be the reason, and be willing to write a book that will sell, which is a deliberate choice. It's not selling out. It's just, hey, do I want to write a book that doesn't make any money, or do I want to write a book that readers love and are willing to pay me for? So you do want to start writing your next book. You don't want to give up. You don't want to spend like a year marketing your one book, unless potentially it's nonfiction and it's a lead in to your other stuff that you sell. Then you could lose money marketing the book and still be gaining new clients or selling courses or events. That could all be fine. But even so, even with nonfiction, and I'll talk about this more in other videos, but there are the books that are lead gen that bring you clients, and there are the books that are platform based brand building around a theme or a topic. And there's a lot of stuff in between. And you can reach more readers by publishing more books. So for nonfiction, especially, like for my platform, I do publishing stuff. I have a book on formatting, a book on cover design, a book on marketing, a book on publishing, common questions, a lot of stuff that's not great, not super, but it gets me found. People discover me. And for fiction, I've been writing lots of books in different genres. So instead of just focusing on paranormal romance, I have paranormal romance, time travel, sci-fi, which lets lots of readers get introduced to my writing and potentially become fans, which grows my audience faster. That's something not a lot of authors do because they usually focus on one genre. I'm writing young adult, so it's young adult's not actually a genre. There's kind of a big mix. So I can write lots of things under the umbrella of young adult and still satisfy my readers. I don't keep a strict list for separating my audiences, but for example, for fiction and for for nonfiction, I definitely do. I have two completely separate lists. I don't cross market or promote at all. I have my nonfiction stuff and my fiction stuff. So you may need to separate if you're too broad. If you're writing like erotica and young adult fiction, that could be a problem. But I have some friends who write, like, young adult fiction can get pretty sexy. So if you write new adult, which is mostly like college age fiction with some sex, that's not exactly erotica. There are reasons to qualify this differently, but it's possible. I know some young adult writers who write a young adult version, and then they write the adult version with actual sex. They basically just take out the sex scenes in one or the other. So I got kind of off topic, but you need to be thinking about all this stuff when you're thinking about the next book, because it's not just about one book. You're probably building an author platform around a career, which probably needs to focus on a genre or a topic under an umbrella subject or heading, because you can't be too broad. You can't satisfy everybody. You have to build an audience, but you can satisfy that audience with different things as long as you know what they like. So those are all important considerations to do your research, to keep publishing, to be writing new things, to be experimenting. But you do want to be writing the next book, because it is true, the easiest way, it's hard to write a book. I don't want to say it's easy to write a book, but I know authors who just write more books. If you can just write more books and they're good quality books that satisfy readers, you can continually boost your income over and over again ad infinitum, which is Latin, which means for infinity, but I probably didn't pronounce it right. Anyway, it is definitely, as long as you're doing it right and you're producing products that people are willing to buy, the more books you launch, the more books you publish, the faster that you get them out there, the easier it's going to be to build a career as an author and to start seeing real income. I've said before, it generally takes about 10 books before you're making serious money, like a living wage. You can do it with less. I have friends who have 3 or 4 books and they make quite a bit of money. So you can definitely do it with less if you're doing everything right, but it's easier to do with more. So I would personally, like, 10 should be your first goal. I'm going to qualify it. I would say, like, you shouldn't really be thinking about making lots of money or quitting your job until you have at least 10 books out. But that assumes you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. You don't have to do that. You can do keyword research. You can figure out what genres are hot and selling. You can find your audience by building a list before you launch. There's lots of ways to not throw spaghetti at the wall and just read the instructions and do it right the first time. You read other people's success stories, you figure out the strategies that work, and you just do it right. You may not have a major bestseller, but you'll basically figure out how well you can do with a certain project. So you do want at least 10 books. On the other hand, if your first book isn't selling at all, you'll need to figure out why, and you need to be doing things to at least get your first book decently selling. because it's probable that you did most things wrong on your first book. And just writing new books and doing the same things wrong for 10 books, you'll have 10 books that don't sell at all. And I see that happen with a lot of authors. They have 20 or 30 books and they say, I write 40,000 words a day and I create a new book every 2 weeks, and they're not selling any book. So just productivity isn't valuable in itself. You need to be producing things that matter to people, that resonate with an audience, that they're willing to pay for, and you need to package them professionally and market them well so that people find them and buy them. So it's somewhere of a balance between those two. You want to shoot for 10 books to be making money. You also want all of your books to be reasonably successful because you're doing a lot of experiments and marketing and testing things out and tweaking. You basically want to be learning on every book so that every book you publish should sell twice as many copies because you are twice as good at understanding what needs to happen between the writing and the marketing, the publishing and the branding and the visibility. Every time you launch a book, you should be twice as good at launching the book. So you need to be learning things. You need to be aggressively failing deliberately by learning new things and experimenting with new things so that when you get to the 10th book, it's a smash breakout bestseller with very little work or marketing because you've built this platform and because you've spent time learning how to do it right.